There are days when anger does not arrive like a storm. It comes quietly. It sits in your chest while you answer politely, while you nod, while you tell yourself it is not worth it. Someone speaks to you in a way that cuts deeper than they know. Someone dismisses your effort. Someone crosses a line and you stay silent, not because you are at peace, but because you are tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending your heart. Tired of carrying a fire that no one else can see. And maybe that is the part no one notices. Not the loud anger, not the sharp words, but the anger you swallow. The one that stays with you long after the moment is over. The one that follows you into the evening, into the quiet room, into the hour when everything should be calm. And yet your mind keeps returning to what was said, what was done, what should have happened instead. Have you ever smiled on the outside while something inside you was breaking into heat? Have you ever kept your voice low while your thoughts were full of noise? Have you ever endured so much in silence that your anger stopped feeling like an emotion and started feeling like a second skin? If you have, then you already know this pain. You know how fury can rise not only from insult, but from disappointment, from being unseen, from giving too much, from holding yourself together for too long. You know how anger can make you feel strong for a moment, then empty the moment after, as if it promises protection but leaves behind exhaustion, as if it says, I will help you survive this, while quietly turning your inner world into a battlefield. And the hardest part is this. Anger is rarely only anger. Sometimes it is hurt that has lost its voice. Sometimes it is grief wearing armor. Sometimes it is the soul's last defense after too many small wounds were ignored. That is why this feeling deserves honesty. Not shame, not denial, not a mask of false calm, because the truth is, many people are not angry because they are cruel. They are angry because they are carrying more than they know how to hold, more silence, more pressure, more disappointment, more loneliness than they ever let the world see. There is a way to stand inside that fire without letting it consume your name. There is a way to face what burns in you and not become ruled by it, not by suppressing it, not by obeying it, but by beginning slowly to see it clearly. And perhaps clarity is where the turning begins. In the next part, we will step closer to that quiet turning point, the place where anger no longer blinds and starts to reveal what has been waiting underneath. When someone hurts us, the first wound is often not the event itself. It is the meaning we give to it in the very next moment. A harsh tone, a cold reply, a look of dismissal, a betrayal so small that no one else would notice, yet heavy enough to stay with us all day. What makes these moments so painful is not only that they happen, it is that they seem to say something about who we are. They make us wonder whether we were too easy to ignore, too easy to disrespect, too unimportant to be treated with care. But if we slow down and look at human behavior with a steadier eye, something begins to change. People do not act from perfect clarity. Most of the time they act from confusion, fear, pride, habit, insecurity, exhaustion, old wounds, or a narrow way of seeing the world. A person who speaks cruelly may believe they are protecting themselves. A person who humiliates others may be deeply ruled by their own weakness. A person who ignores your pain may not be proving that your pain is small. They may simply lack the depth to recognize what they are doing. This is one of the hardest shifts to make inside ourselves. When we are hurt, we instinctively turn inward and ask, "What is wrong with me? Why was I treated this way? Why did they speak to me like that?" But the Stoic spirit asks us to pause before making ourselves the center of another person's blindness. Their action came from their own inner condition, from their own judgments, their own limitations, their own unexamined storms, and those things belong to them before they ever reach us. Think of a family setting. Someone in the house has had a long day, carries pressure they never name, and suddenly speaks with sharpness over something small. A dish left on the table, a late message, a simple misunderstanding. In that moment, their words may land heavily. They may sound as if you are the problem, but often, what is spilling out is not truth about your worth. It is their fatigue, their frustration, their inability to hold themselves together with grace. Or think about friendship. Sometimes a friend becomes distant, dismissive, even strangely cold when you needed warmth the most. At first, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. But later, you may discover they were struggling with envy, shame, confusion, or some private burden they did not know how to carry. Their withdrawal was not a final statement about your value. It was a reflection of where they were trapped within themselves. The same happens in society every day. A stranger speaks harshly. Someone online mocks what they do not understand. A coworker belittles another person in front of others. These actions feel targeted, and in one sense, they are. But they also reveal something larger. They reveal the speaker's level of discipline, their emotional poverty, their lack of self-command, their habit of throwing pain outward because they do not know how to bear it inward with maturity. This does not mean harmful behavior is acceptable. It does not mean we must excuse injustice, tolerate disrespect without boundaries, or pretend cruelty is harmless. Calm understanding is not submission. Clear seeing is not weakness. The point is subtler than that. The point is that another person's conduct, however painful, is born first in their own mind. It grows from what they believe, what they fear, what they have failed to examine, and because of that, it cannot be taken as a clean measure of who you are. A muddy hand leaves a stain, not because the cloth is worthless, but because the hand itself was unclean. Yet in real life, this is difficult to remember. When words strike close to an old wound, they do not feel like a reflection of the other person's inner world. They feel like proof. Proof that we are not enough. Proof that we are easy to replace. Proof that we are weak, forgettable, unlovable, or beneath respect. This is why pain deepens so quickly. We do not merely experience another person's action. We let it enter the hidden room where our own doubts already live. And this is where the Stoic view begins to offer a quiet form of mercy. It reminds us that people often speak from appearances, not from truth. They react from impulse, not wisdom. They judge from their own condition, not from a full vision of our being. What they say or do may affect our circumstances. It may disturb our peace. It may even wound us deeply. But it does not have the authority to define our essence unless we surrender that authority from within. Still, even when we understand this, something in us continues to ache, because knowing that another person acted from their own ignorance does not instantly remove the sting. Understanding is one thing, freedom is another, and perhaps that is where the deeper question begins to rise. Slowly and honestly, from beneath all this reflection, if their behavior is about them, not our true worth, then why do we still hurt so much? Sometimes the deepest pain does not come from what happened. It comes from what we hoped would happen instead. We suffer because a part of us expected tenderness and received coldness, expected honesty and received evasion, expected loyalty and found distance. The wound is not only in the action, it is in the collapse of the image we carried so quietly inside, the image of how this person would treat us, how this moment would unfold, how love, friendship, family, or simple human decency was supposed to feel, and when that image breaks, something in us breaks with it. This is why hurt can feel larger than the event itself. A few words, one betrayal, one silence, one careless gesture. Sometimes it should have passed in an hour, and yet it stays for weeks, months even. Not because the mind is weak, but because the heart had attached meaning to something it deeply wanted to trust. Expectation has a soft voice at first. It does not always announce itself. It lives in little assumptions. Surely they will understand me. Surely after all I have done, they will not treat me this way. Surely my sincerity will be seen. Surely my silence will be respected. Surely my love will be returned with care. But life does not move according to those quiet promises, and people do not always rise to the goodness we imagined in them. So when reality arrives in a rougher form, pain enters through that gap. The gap between what is and what we begged silently for it to be. There is also another layer, a more hidden one. Many wounds do not hurt only because we were mistreated. They hurt because we wanted to be confirmed. We wanted the other person to say, through their actions, that we mattered, that we were enough, that we were not invisible, that our effort, our loyalty, our patience, our tenderness had weight in this world. To be hurt by someone is often to feel, for one sharp moment, that all of this has been denied. That is why the pain burns so deeply. It touches more than the moment. It touches identity. It touches old hunger. It touches the childlike place in every human being that still longs to be chosen without having to beg for it. And then there is attachment. Not only attachment to people, but attachment to roles, outcomes, and emotional stories. We become attached to being understood, attached to being treated fairly, attached to being seen in the way we see ourselves, attached to the hope that if we remain good, patient, and sincere, life will respond with equal sincerity. But life is rarely so balanced. People are often distracted, frightened, wounded, proud, restless, unready. They fail each other in ordinary ways, sometimes without meaning to, sometimes with more carelessness than cruelty. And still, the pain remains real because attachment always makes loss feel personal. It makes disappointment feel like theft. It makes another person's limitation feel like damage done to the self. This is where the Stoic spirit becomes quieter than many people imagine. It does not ask a person to become stone. It does not ask the heart to stop feeling. It does not stand over grief or anger and call them weakness. That would be too shallow, too cold. Human emotion is not a mistake. Hurt is not proof of failure. Sorrow, anger, disappointment, shame, longing. These rise because we are alive, because we care, because we form bonds and meanings and silent inner worlds. The Stoic view is not built on denial. It simply sees danger in surrender. There is a difference between feeling pain and letting pain become the one voice that interprets everything. There is a difference between anger arising and anger taking the seat of judgment. There is a difference between being wounded and becoming devoted to the wound, repeating it inwardly until it becomes our whole identity. Emotion belongs to the human experience, but rule by emotion creates another suffering on top of the first. Because once emotion takes command, it begins to speak in absolutes. It says, "This always happens to me." It says, "They treated me this way because I am nothing." It says, "I will never trust again." It says, "This moment is the truth of my life." And under the spell of that voice, the original injury starts to spread. It enters memory. It enters self-image. It enters tomorrow before tomorrow has even arrived. Perhaps this is why some pains linger longer than the event deserves. Not because the event was small, but because the mind, in trying to protect itself, keeps returning to it, keeps examining it, keeps feeding it fresh meaning. The hurt happened once outside us, and then many times inside us. Still, none of this means the heart is wrong for trembling. It only means there is something delicate and difficult happening within us whenever we are hurt. We are grieving a broken expectation. We are confronting attachment. We are meeting the old desire to be recognized, valued, reassured. And we are discovering how quickly emotion can take an honest wound and turn it into a private world of conclusions. This is not failure. It is simply the hidden structure of suffering. And maybe seeing that structure clearly is the first quiet step. Not out of feeling, but out of being ruled by feeling. Not away from pain, but toward a steadier way of holding it. A way that does not insult the heart, yet does not hand the whole life over to its storms. Because in the end, the feeling itself may not be the deepest danger. The deeper danger may be what we become when we stop seeing it clearly. And that is where the silence before practice begins. There is a quiet kind of strength that begins when a person stops asking, with all their energy, why others are careless, and starts asking what can still be held steady within. Not because the hurt is unreal, not because people suddenly become easier to understand, but because sooner or later, anyone who wants peace must face the same turning point. The world outside does not move by our wishes. Other people do not soften on command. Their moods, their words, their choices, their timing. All of this remains partly beyond our reach. And yet, even in that uncertainty, there is still a place where calm can begin. Imagine a simple moment at home. Someone close to you answers with a cold voice. You had no wish to argue. You only asked a small question, and still the air changes. In the past, this may have been enough to pull your whole mind into tension. You replay the tone. You search for what you did wrong. You prepare a defense in silence. But the Stoic movement begins earlier than that. It begins in the instant you notice that another person's tone is theirs, while your response is still yours. Their irritation may belong to their fatigue, their pressure, their private unrest. Your task is not to manage all of that. Your task is to keep your own inner posture from collapsing around it. This is not distance in a cold sense. It is closeness to reality. A person can care deeply and still refuse to let every difficult moment enter the center of the soul. That refusal is not indifference. It is a form of inner order. The same is true in friendship. A message is ignored. A kindness is not returned. A silence appears where warmth once lived. The heart naturally starts to move toward interpretation. Maybe I no longer matter. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe this was never real. Yet there is another possibility, and it is often the beginning of peace. The possibility of waiting before deciding what the moment means. Not every delay is rejection. Not every awkwardness is betrayal. Not every distance is a judgment of your worth. In real life, much suffering grows in the space between what happened and the meaning we attach to it. Stoic practice, in its quietest form, asks for a pause in that space, a breath, a little room, enough room for the mind not to run ahead of truth. There is also the practice of returning to what actually belongs to us. This sounds simple until life tests it. At work, someone takes credit too easily. In public, another person speaks with more confidence than honesty. In the family, someone refuses to admit their part in the tension. The impulse is immediate. We want to correct them, reshape them, make them see. We want fairness to arrive through their awakening. But peace becomes fragile when it depends entirely on another person becoming wiser. Sometimes they will not. Sometimes not today. Sometimes not at all. So the steadier path turns inward, not in defeat, but in clarity. Can I remain measured here? Can I speak without losing form? Can I protect what is right in me, even when what is right in the situation remains unfinished? This is where self-command becomes more useful than emotional force, not because emotion is forbidden, but because once the inner world is handed over to reaction, the original wound begins to spread. A careless remark becomes an entire evening of unrest. A disappointment becomes a new story about life. One moment becomes a mood, and the mood becomes a lens. Stoic steadiness interrupts that chain. It does not erase pain. It simply refuses to let pain decide everything that follows. Think of someone walking home after an uncomfortable conversation. Nothing dramatic happened, no shouting. No open conflict, just a few words that carried disrespect. The old habit would be to relive the scene again and again, polishing the injury with every repetition. But a different habit is possible. The person notices the replay beginning, notices how the mind keeps trying to reopen the same door, and instead of entering once more, they return to what is present, the road beneath their feet, the evening air, the simple fact that the moment has passed while the self is still here, still able to choose its next step, Sometimes calm does not arrive through solving everything. Sometimes it arrives through not continuing what reality has already finished. Another principle appears in the smallest daily disappointments. A person you trusted does not respond with the care you expected. A family member remains unchanged after many conversations. A stranger is abrupt for no clear reason. The Stoic temperament does not build peace on the fantasy that people will always act well. It leaves room for human limitation, not in a bitter way, in a sober way. It understands that much of life becomes lighter when expectation becomes more honest. People are often mixed, capable of warmth and carelessness, sincerity and confusion, affection and blindness. When we remember this, we are less shocked by imperfection and less likely to hand our balance over to it. And still, the deepest movement remains inward. What can be protected is not the behavior of others, but the condition of one's own mind. That is where dignity lives, not in winning every exchange, not in being approved by every person, not in avoiding all hurt, but in meeting hurt without becoming scattered by it, in staying gentle without becoming weak, in staying clear without becoming hard, in carrying one's own center quietly, even when the world around it loses shape for a while. Perhaps that is why this path, though often described as discipline, begins to feel less like strain and more like relief. There is something lighter in no longer chasing control where control does not exist, something cleaner in no longer demanding that every person understand, agree, or behave well before the heart is allowed to rest. From that place, peace no longer feels far away. It feels simple, near, like a room within yourself that was there all along, waiting to be entered without force. And when that room is found, even briefly, there is a softer way to move through the day, with less weight in the chest and less noise in the mind. There comes a point in life when a person grows tired of winning the wrong battles, not because they have become weak, not because they no longer see injustice, pride, provocation, or the small games people play with one another, but because they begin to understand the cost of that kind of victory. They see how often the desire to win is not really about truth. It is about being recognized, being justified, being the one who stands above the other in the end. And that kind of victory, even when achieved, rarely brings rest. You prove your point. You say the sharper thing. You defend yourself well. You make the other person fall silent. From the outside, it may look like strength. It may even feel satisfying for a moment. But when the room grows quiet again, something inside often remains unsettled. The mind keeps moving. The chest is still tight. The heart does not feel free, because defeating someone is not the same as being released from them. This is where a deeper understanding begins. To defeat another person is an outer event. To remain inwardly undisturbed is an inner condition. These two things are not the same. A person may win the argument and still lose their peace. They may protect their pride and still carry bitterness for days. They may be applauded by others and still feel inwardly burdened by the need to prove, to resist, to return, to answer again. Stoic maturity does not lean toward this kind of struggle. It sees that many conflicts offer a false reward. They invite the self into a contest where even success leaves a residue, a heavy one. Because the more your peace depends on defeating another, the more your inner life is tied to people you may not even respect. Their words govern your mood. Their opinion enters your thoughts. Their behavior decides whether your day feels whole or broken. That is not freedom. Freedom begins in a quieter place. It begins when a person no longer needs every misunderstanding corrected, no longer needs every insult answered, no longer needs every unfairness turned into a personal trial. Not because these things stop mattering entirely, but because the soul starts to value peace more than performance. There is a difference between strength and resistance for its own sake. Some people spend years believing they are strong because they are always ready. Ready with a reply. Ready with distance. Ready with control. Ready to show that no one can touch them without consequence. But often this is not strength. It is exhaustion wearing armor. It is a life organized around reaction. A mind that never fully sits down. A spirit that remains alert even in moments meant for rest. The Stoic path offers something more spacious than that. It asks a quieter question, not, how do I come out above them? But what remains of me if I stop entering every contest? What clarity appears when I no longer measure myself against those who are still fighting to be seen? What calm becomes possible when I stop borrowing conflict as a way to feel solid? There is something profoundly adult in this shift. A mature person begins to notice that not every victory deserves pursuit. Some are too small for the energy they consume. Some are too noisy. Some require you to become a version of yourself that you do not want to carry home. And some, perhaps most of all, keep you chained to a moment that should have ended long ago. To let go of the need to win is not surrender in the ordinary sense. It is discernment. It is the ability to look at a situation and recognize that preserving the order of your own mind is worth more than the pleasure of standing over another person. It is knowing that a peaceful conscience is greater than the final word, that sleeping with a quiet heart is greater than being admired for your sharpness. That walking away inwardly unbroken is greater than being declared right in the eyes of those who do not have to live inside your mind. This is why the Stoic does not need triumph in the common sense. They are not trying to dominate the room. They are not trying to make every opponent smaller. They are not trying to collect moments of superiority and mistake them for self-respect. They understand that the one who must always win is still controlled by what is outside, still dependent, still vulnerable to interruption, still waiting for the world to behave in a certain way before calm can begin. But the one who guards the mind differently, that person begins to move with another kind of dignity. They listen without absorbing everything. They respond without surrendering themselves. They leave some things unfinished on the outside because they are finished with them on the inside. And that inner completion is not coldness. It is not distance from life. It is a form of release, a loosening, a refusal to drag every encounter into the deeper chambers of the soul. It is the recognition that many people act from states they have not understood, and that joining them there only multiplies confusion. To remain inwardly peaceful does not mean life becomes untouched by disappointment. It means disappointment no longer becomes a throne from which everything else is judged. It means another person's unrest does not automatically become your burden. It means you can witness pettiness without kneeling before it. You can witness pride without trying to crush it. You can witness disorder without inviting it to live inside you. There is great freedom in this, a freedom so quiet that many overlook it. It does not announce itself with applause. It does not sparkle like revenge. It does not satisfy the ego in dramatic ways. But it gives back something far rarer: space in the mind, breath in the chest. A sense that your life is no longer being negotiated moment by moment through the actions of others. And perhaps this is the hidden beauty of the Stoic heart. It does not need to stand at the center of every collision. It does not need to drag every wound into a courtroom. It does not need to leave every encounter with proof of power. Sometimes its deepest strength is simply this: to remain whole while the world remains unfinished, to let others keep their noise, to let the moment pass through without turning it into identity, to step away not in defeat but in lightness, like someone leaving a narrow road at dusk, and finding, just beyond the last turn, an open path washed in quiet gold, where the feet grow softer, the air grows clear, and the soul no longer needs to look back. In the end, perhaps nothing outside us becomes completely gentle. People still misunderstand. Some still speak from unrest. Some still leave without explanation. Some still touch our lives with carelessness they do not even notice. And still, something can change. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly. Like a room inside the self becoming less crowded. Like water settling after a long disturbance. Like a face once tense with inward struggle, learning again how to rest. This is the quiet spirit of the Stoic path, not the absence of pain, not the performance of strength, not the cold refusal to feel. It is something more human than that. It is the slow return to what cannot be taken so easily, a steadier gaze, a calmer judgment, a heart that still feels, but does not hand itself over so quickly. There is a kind of maturity that comes when a person no longer asks life to be free of friction. They begin to see that difficulty is not always an interruption. Sometimes it is the place where the inner shape of a person is revealed, not to the world, but to themselves. In those unseen moments, after the harsh word, after the disappointment, after the long silence, a choice quietly appears, not a loud choice, not a heroic one, just a small inward turning toward clarity, toward restraint, toward dignity, toward the part of oneself that does not need to be defended in every moment. And over time, this changes a life, not because the world becomes easier, but because the soul becomes less eager to fight every shadow, less willing to kneel before every emotion, less hungry for proof from those who cannot give it. There is peace in that, a very plain peace. A very deep one, the kind that does not need to explain itself, the kind that arrives without noise, the kind that lets a person walk through the same world, and yet no longer be carried away by it so easily. Maybe that is enough. Maybe wisdom is not found in mastering life. Maybe it is found in no longer being mastered by each passing moment, in no longer letting injury become identity, in no longer letting another person's confusion become the measure of your worth, in no longer mistaking reaction for truth. And perhaps this inner freedom is not something grand. Perhaps it is simply this: to remain gentle without becoming fragile, to remain awake without becoming hard, to remain present without losing oneself in every passing storm. That kind of strength is rarely seen from a distance. It has no spectacle, no applause, no final argument, no need to be named. It lives in the way someone grows quieter inside, in the way they stop returning to old fires, in the way they begin to leave some things where they happened. Instead of carrying them into tomorrow, there is a tenderness in that, a tenderness toward one's own mind, a refusal to wound oneself further, a soft understanding that life has always been mixed, beauty and loss, warmth and indifference, nearness and distance, calm and disruption. And to live well is not to remove one side of that truth. It is to stand among both, without falling apart each time the darker side appears. So the path becomes simpler as it deepens. See clearly. Feel honestly, hold inwardly, release what does not belong in the center again and again, quietly, until what once shook you no longer enters with the same authority, until what once consumed you passes through with less noise, until even pain begins to lose its power to define the whole sky. Then something unexpected happens. Life does not become empty. It becomes spacious. The mind is no longer crowded by every offense. The heart is no longer chained to every disappointment. The self is no longer waiting at the door of the world, asking to be told what it is worth. It already knows enough to remain still. And maybe that is where true calm begins. Not in certainty, not in control, but in this silent readiness to meet life as it is, without abandoning oneself. When the video ends, the room will still be the same. Your life will still be waiting. The unfinished things will still be there. The people, the memories, the small tensions, the questions without answers. But perhaps you will sit with them a little differently, a little less entangled, a little less afraid, a little more whole. And if anything remains after all these words, let it be this quiet image, a person walking slowly at dusk. No audience, no victory to display, no anger left to feed, only a long road, a softer breath, and the strange peace of carrying nothing unnecessary into the night. Some burdens leave only when you stop calling them yours.